When growth stalls, most leaders reach for surface fixes like new campaigns, a sharper sales deck, even new hires. But the real issues are often deeper, such as misaligned systems, broken handoffs, or unreliable data. That's why we built the Growth Readiness Score. In just 5 minutes, you'll get a clear score across 4 critical areas of your revenue operations and see how you stack up against your peers with benchmark data. Tap the link in the show notes to get started. It's quick, insightful, and often reveals issues leaders don't expect.
Franchise Empire built their entire success on the shoulders of content, on content strategy. And what we've learned over the past 3 to 4 years, specifically with the implementation and distribution of LLMs being widely utilized today, is that content is the key source for a lot of these agentic tools.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. Hello and welcome back. Today I'm joined by Chantel Soumis, Head of Marketing and Partnerships at Franchise Empire. With more than 20 years of experience across marketing, branding, business development, and franchise growth, she brings a practical perspective on how organizations can create stronger customer engagement while building scalable and measurable growth systems. Her work is focused on helping businesses better understand customer behavior, strengthen brand positioning, and use technology intentionally to improve both marketing performance and customer experience. Chantel is an international speaker, mentor, and advocate for leadership development, personal branding, and thoughtful AI adoption. Chantel, welcome to the RevOps Champions podcast.
Thank you for having me, Brendon. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's been a few months since
I
we
know.
saw you in Vegas.
6 months.
Yeah, right. Chantel, it's June. We're halfway through the year 2026. You combine AI, customer psychology, user experience, and data into your approach. How do these elements work together to create stronger growth systems?
It's a whole ecosystem. You know, if one thing falls off, everything falls apart. Data obviously is the foundation for everything that we do, because without things, if we're not measuring anything, how do we know we're being successful at it, right? How are we tracking and measuring our successes? So having our KPIs, we operate at an EOS model. Are you familiar with the EOS framework?
Yes, we use it. We use it
Yes,
too.
I thought so. I'm pretty sure we had that conversation at one point. In the EOS system, we have our quarterly rocks, and those rocks are defining our success, because if we aren't hitting those or exceeding them, something's wrong. Something's breaking in the back end, and we need to resolve it, fix it, or shift our KPI if need be. But ultimately, if we aren't reporting on those weekly and we're not seeing how quickly and closely we're getting to our goals for marketing and sales, everything could be doomed for destruction.
Absolutely. Yes. And of course, I mean, to your point of rocks. So for those who aren't familiar with the analogy, it's kind of the mason jar. When you're doing annual or quarterly planning, you want to make sure that your highest priorities, which are your rocks, go into the jar before you add the gravel and the sand and the water, because otherwise you're not going to fit it all into the jar. And so I think, to your point, Chantel, when you talk about rocks, again, rocks are prioritized every 90 days, right? Based on the goals of the organization from a long-term perspective, as well as for a 1 year at a time. And to your point, again, you have to be able to measure that on a weekly basis, because otherwise you get to the end of the quarter and you haven't actually made any movement on your highest priorities. And so you're not actually making progress, right? Absolutely. I like that perspective. And thanks for the reminder.
Yeah.
So Chantel, as brands scale, where do you most often see the disconnect between marketing activity and actual customer engagement?
Not understanding your avatars or your ICPs, your ideal customer profiles. When I come into an entity, so formally I have experience as a fractional CMO for franchisors. And so when I would enter into a new environment, my goal was not just to understand the franchisees, but also to understand their customers as best as I possibly could, to better understand the brand. Because nobody understands your brand better than your customers, because they're receiving the full-on experience and scope. And a lot of times I see this done wrong at the leadership level is folks get too zoned in to their own KPIs, to their own rocks and
Hmm.
goals, and they get their blinders on and they don't quite see outside of their own greater picture. And that is understanding and having those quality interviews and testimonials and reviews, really understanding the whole buyer experience because that ultimately is shaping your entire marketing infrastructure. Because if
Mm.
you're not speaking directly to them in their words, what are you doing? You're going to reach the wrong people. You're going to have wasted resources, wasted dollars, and wasted time for your own team routing and mitigating these poor leads or these poor prospective customers that don't match your enterprise
Hmm.
goals. So, understanding, I call it a listening tour. Anytime it should happen maybe quarterly, where you
Hmm.
go in and you prioritize meeting with a handful of customers and users. And that's where you ask them the hard questions. What made you decide to go with this brand? Why do you come back? What could we change to improve your experience so that you are a brand advocate for life?
Hmm.
I like to think about one of my favorite brands, which is Culver's frozen custard. You're a fellow Midwesterner, you get it.
Yep.
I am a major fan. I'm one of their biggest fans. And what they do is they implement that consistency approach across the board. Consistency with their promotions, consistency with their brand presence locally, as well
Mm.
as at the corporate level. And that's what really makes a powerful business, especially a powerful franchise, is creating those systems where everything's memorable and unforgettable because they're listening and you're in the weeds with their end users, with their customers regularly.
Mm. Yeah, really good. One of the things that I know about you is that you're passionate about getting content right. So, as part of any sort of marketing strategy, having the right content is absolutely critical. What better way is there to sort of come up with a content strategy than interviewing the actual customers or users of whatever it is that you're trying to do, which then informs your content strategy, which then of course attracts more of the same types of customers to the ones that are already happy and telling you what they want to have an even better experience.
Absolutely. If you're doing marketing right, the best marketers don't have to tell the brand narrative. Your customers are telling it for you. So if you can get your audience speaking and singing your praises on your behalf, that's word of mouth marketing on its own. And we all know that's the strongest form. So if we can
Hmm.
do that, they're creating the content for you, or you're bringing them and giving them a platform to provide that sort of feedback or that content, which will pay forward. And that's why I love working at Franchise Empire because Franchise Empire built their entire success on the shoulders of content, on content strategy. And what
Mm.
we've learned over the past 3 to 4 years, specifically with the implementation and distribution of LLMs being widely utilized today, is that content is the key source for a lot of these agentic tools
Hmm.
and feeding these agentic tools and these LLMs content from the battlefield, from real life lessons, is really how people and brands are going to continue to rise above the rest and be found organically.
Right. Yeah. And of course, coming back to what you were saying, when you sort of connect the whole content strategy back to the metrics and the KPIs, one of the things that every business, once they hit a sort of certain level of sophistication where they start to understand what their metrics should be, again, you talked about if your customer is essentially doing your marketing for you, that really drives down your cost of customer acquisition, otherwise known as CAC. And of course, if you're doing that right, the other metric that so many companies track or should be tracking is the lifetime value of a customer. And typically those two work in tandem, right? So if you're increasing the lifetime value and decreasing the cost to acquire every customer, then you've essentially reached the holy grail. I really like how those two things come together.
That's the beauty of the full life cycle marketing, right? A lot of folks get stuck up on omni-channel or multi-channel marketing and they lose sight on the full life cycle, which is really creating that whole feedback loop to feed the entire ecosystem so that it starts running like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, Chantel, you started talking there about the LLMs and AI and sort of the whole agentic movement in general. We know that a lot of companies are adopting AI right now to greater or lesser degrees of success. From your perspective, because this is all still very fresh for the average company, what separates organizations that are creating real business value from those that are simply adding more noise?
That's a good question. And that's not just a response to you asking me that. It really makes me think. And I know I've seen a lot of brands do it really well. And I've seen a lot of brands just tank, just do it awfully. And I
Hmm.
think what sets it apart and what I know and you know as a consumer and anyone listening here will be able to understand and pinpoint exactly when they had these experiences is when you're in your social media feed and you're seeing an ad come through and the words are not matching up to their lips. And you
Hmm.
immediately know that this is not a real human being. And
Hmm.
that makes you left to engage with this brand because where's the trust in that? It's
Hmm.
almost like these brands are trying to fool you to engage with them because they think you're going to think that this is a real human, which could make or break your trust instantly. And as they say, you have only one shot at a first impression.
Hmm.
So don't screw it up by doing that. I've seen that happen time and time again in the franchise industry, mostly because people think that they have to, right? A lot of these brands think that I need to start utilizing these tools because they're fresh and hot off the press. And if I don't use them now, I'm going to fall behind the competition.
Hmm.
And I don't have time or money for that right now, right? So
Yeah.
they're making these mistakes and they're risky. They're really, really risky. So the best brands are taking very calculated actions and they are prioritizing people and the experience. And I know that's a big focus for you and your team and your company is
Hmm.
really making sure that one, you have the right people in the right seats. Because if you're going to have these people who are making these very, very, very risky decisions to put a lot of emphasis on AI in front of your consumer base, it could really damage your brand quickly. The
Hmm.
one other thing that best performing brands are doing is they have brand listening tools, they have sentiment scoring, they are monitoring what people are talking about them in the digital ecosystem so that they can get ahead of the game and they can respond to any kind of lower performing sentiment, which is maybe somebody bashing or saying something not so great or critiquing the brand.
Hmm.
Versus when people uplift it and they sing your praises. That's another train you want to get on because you want to be able to keep that conversation going and engage and encourage more voices to lift your brand narrative.
Mm. Yeah, which is interesting because it comes back to the strength of the leadership, right? So the example that you gave, why would a brand put out these ads where the words aren't matching the video, essentially, right? And you have to think that somewhere along the line in that decision making process, someone came to leadership and said, "Oh well, we could now do you know 10 times the ads at half the cost." So they made it based on price, but didn't actually think about the cost consequence of the experience that the prospect would have in this case. By what happens if they lose trust in that brand, what is the cost of that? Because we all know that once you've lost trust in a brand, it takes a really long time to gain that trust back again. Mm.
That's so true, Brendan. When you think about the costs aside from it, the cost of what happens when it goes right, well, what happens if it goes wrong? What
Mhm.
happens when we have to do damage control and we have to hire a PR agency to come in and clean this all up? That's a big
Mhm.
risk. And a lot of folks don't think about the cost in that risk.
Yeah. Yeah. It is really interesting. On the show, we talk a lot about brands are coming to us to essentially build the systems that they've outgrown, their CRM. And typically they're building the CRM at the corporate level and then making that same CRM available across all franchisees so that the data flows across the entire network or system. But one of the things that we often have to sort of go through an educational process around is that we cannot build the technology until we've understood where leadership is at. If you have the right people in place, how are your processes going to potentially change as you scale and grow, and how is your data going to change, your metrics or your KPIs, like we've already touched on a few times? How are those going to change as you again mature and get ready for scaling? Only once we've figured out those three things can we then start mapping and building out the CRM that's actually going to make those processes and data real. So it's again comes back to always it starts with leadership making a decision and making a decision that is longer term versus a decision that's just a sort of reactive short term decision, which actually might end up costing them a lot more in the long run.
100%.
So, okay, so we're starting to touch a little bit now on the sort of the psychology of sort of getting things right and getting things wrong when it comes to sort of marketing and essentially the customer journey. How does consumer psychology influence the way brands should think about messaging, positioning, and customer experience today?
It's everything. It really is. I mean, at the end of the day, the brand experience is really what's going to make or break the longevity of your brand's life cycle. One of the things that I like to talk about is having an anti-AI policy. So, yeah, come at me. This is where everybody that's an avid AI user is saying, no, Chantel, you should be utilizing all AI as much as you possibly can. But no, I agree in having an anti AI policy, which is when you absolutely should not leverage it. And
Uh-huh.
there's a lot of times when you're talking about really understanding your audience, it's something that's a human to human analysis. And you can break that down and have your own perspective on things. And then you could cross analyze using your AI tools to help you dig deeper. And where I'm going with this is there are certain things that you can do and leverage to maximize your marketing and your sales approach, which is help me write this email, help me come up with a title for this blog. Well, you can based on what's performed best in the industry, but you
Mhm.
know your audience better than your LLM does. And you can
Mhm.
have your LLM research, do perform deep research and try to understand the buyers that are coming through your website portal, or you can feed it the information that you know from your listening tours. And you can
Mhm.
really use the human intervention approach to make the best decision, a human based interest decision on
Mhm.
those items, on the headlines, on the scripts, on all of the marketing collateral to make sure that it would be best suited for your audience. Because if you're just going to put blind trust into any kind of tool, that could be, again, doomed for destruction. It could really shoot yourself in the foot and cause a leak in your budget.
Right, right. Well, and to your point, I mean, if we're seeing this a lot, and I think, fortunately, many brands and companies are realizing that they need to change their strategy a little because, you take a home services brand or a wellness brand, if every marketing team at every one of those brands is just using whatever the LLMs are telling them, how do you differentiate between, let's just say, that's it's an HVAC company or a plumbing company or whatever, a gym or like a sauna business. If they're competing with other businesses in the same industry and they're just using the content that's been fed to them by the LLMs, how is the customer going to tell the difference between one brand and another? And in fact, again, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Once they start seeing that every sauna franchise or every HVAC franchise is saying the same thing, they're going to lose trust in all of them until they find one that has a more unique and a message that resonates in a way that they feel understood.
100%. Again, that is where you really have to come in and play with the human intervention scope. It can really defeat if you're leaning in and you're not just okay, everybody's using LLM, so everything's sounding the same. It's also defeating your own creativity. In fact, what was it? A study that I read that school systems are starting to ban, not in the United States, in other countries, they're going to ban the use of AI in their classrooms because it's damaging
Mm.
their IQs. It's literally sinking their IQ scores. So it's really important to keep that into perspective as well, that the user is only as smart as what you feed it. And if you're putting blind trust again and you're putting so many things onto automation, it could really be, damaging.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting times, that's for sure. So,
Yeah. We're
Chantel,
definitely learning day
Chantel,
to day, aren't we?
yeah, well, which is all what it's all about. Like we say around here at Dynamic all the time, you're either winning or learning, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So,
I like that perspective.
yeah. So we're sort of touching now the authenticity of content and messaging. And I know you've spoken about the importance of authenticity and personal branding, which are very connected. Why do those matter even more as AI becomes a larger part of how businesses communicate?
You couldn't have queued me up better for that question. And that's along the lines of what we've been speaking about. If we're going to be in a world of automation, the human difference is what really is captured, right? When you look at these
Mhm.
advertisements and you see models that are, have perfectly aligned teeth, and they have, perfectly symmetrical faces, you realize how boring that is growing. You can
Hmm.
tell, you can smell AI generated everything a mile away. And it's becoming in such a sense that when you see these flaws in people or perceived flaws in people, it ignites a form of connection that triggers dopamine, right? It triggers endorphins. It triggers so many amazing chemicals to be rushing into your brain because we're lacking it. We're lacking that human to human connection.
Hmm.
It's wild. When I try to create my own AI content in an authentic world, when I'm trying to preach for authenticity and organic conversations and relationships, and I see that the tools correct my face, I get upset. I get
Hmm.
really upset. And I'm like, well, hold on. Did that need to be fixed? I don't think it does. And it goes on to all of these other bigger conversations that the world is having right now about this idea of perfection and what that looks like, and us breaking through the noise as brands and as professionals and as leaders, that we shouldn't be trying to fit this idea of perfection. We really do
Hmm.
need to embrace the human experience, figure out how we fit into that, where our unique gifts and strategies are, what our unique differentiators as a brand are, so that we can really stand out and influence the world with a lens of positivity and inspiration and hope, not clickbait, not negativity, not hot takes that
Hmm.
grind people's gears the wrong way.
Yeah. Yeah, which is interesting because, we live in a very competitive society. And interestingly, sort of looping back to what you were talking about EOS earlier, and what this reminded me of, essentially talking about is perfection, right? So I did some sort of deeper work last year. So there's, whenever I'm sort of stuck on something, I'll often go back to like Japanese sort of culture and beliefs. And some of us are familiar with some of the things in, that come from Japan, like ikigai and whatever. The one that really stuck out to me just in the last year, because of exactly what you're talking about around how AI can really lack authenticity. And it's, again, this drive for perfection. And of course, we all want to do that. So the one I'm talking about is called wabi sabi, which is embracing imperfection, right? And that's one of the things that has like stood the test of time. And what can be more authentic than that? And it's in the same thing on in EOS. So in EOS, if you're working with an implementer, they'll tell you over and over again, when you're doing your 90-day planning and you're planning your rocks and whatever, it's not about perfection, it's about progress, right? So I really like how those two sort of come together. And I think the more we lean into sort of embracing imperfection and authenticity, which how do you have personal branding, for example, if you don't lean into imperfection and you're trying to make everything look and sound perfect?
I was referencing this book earlier, and I know that your audience can't see it, but it's called The Six Types of Working Genius. Have you heard of the Working Genius before?
Very familiar. We use it. We use it
Oh,
here.
I
Yeah.
love, are you kidding? You do? No
Yeah.
way. Oh,
Yeah.
that's fantastic.
I was fortunate enough to be in the very first sort of when Patrick Lencioni rolled it out. I think it's now 4 years ago. One of the first sort of communities that he rolled it out to was Vistage. And I happened to be in Vistage. So I've been following it since it came out, essentially.
It is seriously life changing. It helps you
Hmm.
really and truly. I mean, I believe that the Zoracle has some form of elements of something similar to this, which is very
Hmm.
common in the franchising space. But the six types of working genius are absolutely game changing. They are breakthroughs for leadership styles. In fact, I worked for 12 hours yesterday on workflows in HubSpot. And I
Wow.
kept, yeah, not okay. It's unacceptable in any other situation. I mean, I was up from sunup to sundown, way past sundown.
Hmm.
And I kept kicking myself. I kept thinking, why can't I be smarter? Why am I so dumb? Why can't I figure out this workflow? Where is the hiccup coming out that I need to resolve? And I
Hmm.
kept thinking, no, no, no. I am not a T on the working genius, on the widget, right? I am
Hmm.
not a T. I should not be
Yes.
anywhere near a workflow building right now. I need to be the visionary, the wonder, the invention, maybe even enablement to help get to these workflows through, but really understanding the fact that you can learn. If you're not winning, you're learning. I love that. That is so
Hmm.
brilliant because you can learn, and that's what, hindsight's 2020. I was like, gosh, why did I waste all of that time? I know I'm not built or designed to be in that kind of a seat. I need to get out of that and separate myself from that. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of leadership infrastructures right now are completely dismissing the sense that you have people in seats that probably shouldn't be in those seats to increase that
Mhm.
productivity. And where I could
Right.
have just been, hey, listen, to our IT person, this is not my wheelhouse, and I am going to waste and burn. I am going to burn our own dollars at this company, wasting my own time and resources to do this where I could be focusing on higher dollar objectives.
Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
should have done it sooner, but I learned, and these kinds of resources are absolutely everything for leadership and productivity in any department, not just in marketing.
Yeah. In fact, so for me, Working Genius goes really well with one of my favorite books over the last couple of years, which is Who Not How by
Yes.
Dan Sullivan. And if you think so, for those people who aren't familiar with Working Genius, so there are 6 different types of genius. So wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. And every person, when you do the assessment, which takes less than 10 minutes, it'll tell you what are your two working geniuses. In other words, what are the two that you should be spending most of your time in? What are the two that you're competent at, but again should spend limited time? And then what are the two that are your frustrations that you should spend as little time in that kind of way of working as possible? And the idea is that when you're building a team, which again any company is a team sport. When you're building a team, you're looking to hire or add people to the team who have different geniuses to what you do. It sounds, Chantel, like you and I might have similar. Mine is actually WI, and it sounds like yours might be similar. So when I'm looking to build a team of people around me, which is what we do, I'm looking for people who have the genius of discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. So for example, just on the working genius, because I'm a WI, which is wonder and invention. So as I'm building any team that I'm part of, whether it's a leadership team or an operational team, I need to make sure that I'm partnering with people who have the other 4 geniuses, which are discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. And that you might find that in two other people, or you might need 3 other people to get all 6 geniuses on a team. But like Patrick Lencioni says, this is where anything that like marriage, for example, where there's typically only 2 people involved, you just have to accept the fact. It's kind of like wabi sabi. You have to accept the fact that between 2 people, the best you're ever going to do is cover 4 geniuses, which means you're still going to be, have 2 that are going to be frustrating to you. In our case, like my wife and I actually share 1 genius, so we have 3 that are going to be frustrations for us. But again, just at least knowing that, we know how we can build sort of systems around us to make sure that we cover through our executive assistants or whatever the things that are our weaknesses essentially. And it's leaning into your strengths, and then coming back to the who not how. It's about who do you get to who loves doing the things that you actually don't like doing, and why would you keep doing the things you don't like doing. Anyway.
Absolutely. So it's so interesting that you're a WI. So you're like high on top of the mountain. Like you are really seeing things way up here. I am actually a discernment and enablement type of person. So I am
Okay.
perfect in my seat of being able to lead teams and coach people because I can discern information and enable them to make movement, which is a perfect managerial seat. And if anyone listening to this is looking to hire people who are in those spots, a D and E is terrific. And even a galvanizer, right? A G.
Mhm.
But where I was in the weeds for 12 hours yesterday trying to, just kicking myself about this was a T. This was the
Yes.
the lowest, like in the weeds. You can't even get any more granular of a level. And it was just driving me nuts because it was one of those frustrations, one of the biggest frustrations.
Yeah.
And to your point, I know you work with your wife. I don't work with my husband. Thank God for that. I don't think that business would last. But he's an I. He's an
Yeah.
invention through
Hmm.
and through and through, but he doesn't discern anything. And it drives me crazy when we're trying to do a project, like install a fireplace mantle or whatnot. And he's not discerning that this is a steel This is a steel fireplace. We need steel screws for this. No, we're going to try and do everything else. We're going to invent ideas to get to this solution before we think and discern the information. And then we actually realize we have an enablement plan in place.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good example. And I mean, we probably don't want to hop on this for too long, but the reason that you did the 12 hours in HubSpot yesterday was because of your enablement, which means that you want to help, you want to sort of help towards the bigger goal that you have. And but the perfect, to your point, the perfect person to do that for 12 hours on a regular basis would be an ET. So they have the enablement and the tenacity, and they just that is the perfect person to have doing those kinds of tasks.
And Brendan, the
Um,
worst thing is it probably would have taken them 30 minutes, not
I mean,
12 hours.
chances are, right? Because when
Yeah.
you the whole point that led and what why Lencioni came up with this was which was based on decades of consulting to leadership teams and understanding why some teams were really functional and others were dysfunctional. That's what that was all the data that allowed him to build this very powerful tool. And again, it's like what most of us don't understand is the fact that things that are naturally easy for us aren't necessarily naturally easy for other people. And that's just that and that's one of the common sort of trip ups that we run into. But exact to your point, I mean, if you find the right person, they would love just cranking out 12 hours a day, at least for a few days a week. Whereas if you're the wrong person doing that, you're going to be completely exhausted after just one day of doing that, never mind trying to do it for two. Yeah. Anyhow, let's get back to the. I mean, I think this is all relevant because what we're trying to figure out is again leaning into your strengths and making smart, leadership decisions. So let's just, as we wrap up here, let's think about from a franchise perspective, any franchise or multi-location brand. How do you balance brand consistency with localized customer experiences?
The ultimate challenge in franchising, isn't it? I
Definitely seems to be one of
believe,
them.
right? Yes. Marketing is always the lowest scored item on the FBR survey every single
Mm,
year. With it doesn't fail. Like without hesitation, you're going to know marketing's going to need work. And we're going to get some insights and feedback from our audience on this. I think the most important thing is making sure that your franchisees feel heard, right? This is a huge area of opportunity for most franchisors is that they have a marketing team in place, but they don't have somebody that is sitting in with their FBC, right? Or their coach on staff that's helping them
mm,
at the local level make sure that they are engaged, they have everything they need to thrive, and so forth. But having somebody from marketing, especially at the marketing leadership level, where you can build into that vision and you can optimize your systems to make sure that everybody's on board. Is really important because if they don't
mm,
feel heard or listened or respected, they're going to disengage completely and they're going to go
yeah.
rogue and they're going to do their own things in marketing, which we don't want, right? We have a brand book for a reason. We have protocols for a reason. And that's really important to one, not only set in place your brand positioning, your alignment strategy, and consistent coaching for your franchisees on networking, on engaging in the local marketplace, but also making sure that they have that feedback cycle so they can give you what they need from you and your marketing systems so that they're not going outside of the lines, which is every marketer's nightmare in franchising is seeing these folks who are really creative and they love testing new things, but then watching, these things maybe sink or reflect poorly on the brand where it does require some mitigation. So I
Hmm.
suggest having that feedback loop, making sure that your marketing leadership team is getting engaged at the local level as well as the corporate level and building a ecosystem where everybody can communicate and you can get that information back as well. It's just turning this all back to our first conversation, which was getting that feedback loop from your customers as well, because your
Mm.
customers ultimately are shaping the entire brand. They are the brand. You're not the brand, your customers are.
Yeah, and I guess and of course, this is one of the solutions that we like to build for brands. And again, you and I were talking about this before, where a brand has to get to a point where the pain of not putting a system in place to allow the flow of this information from across all franchisees and back to corporate and back down again until they have that system, it's going to be really painful because every piece of feedback has to be provided manually, which means that there's got to be a person at corporate on the receiving end of that, and then they have to put it somewhere, which typically means it ends up in all over the places where the data is actually not accessible, etc. But yes, I do agree that again, it's just that the decisions that are made with it when it comes to marketing, as far as consistency and customer experience are concerned, again, are potentially it's just the it's not as strategic as it could be, because you would think that if it was more strategic, then you would have fewer challenges when that FBR survey comes out every year.
You got it. Yep.
Yeah. So, Chantal, as we wrap up here, looking ahead, how do you see AI changing customer expectations, marketing leadership, and growth strategy over the next couple of years?
Every day we're learning more and more things. Who was it that just said that they over calculated how many jobs AI is going to replace because AI cannot replace the human experience? Plain and
Hmm.
simple. Well, marketing is storytelling in a nutshell of the human experience. So
Hmm.
where a lot of us marketers are shifting every single day, losing sleep over these algorithms that keep changing with our advertising dollars, the ultimate goal here is to continue to be a human-based brand doing incredible things with the
Hmm.
tools that enable us to do these things and enable us to scale. So where do I see ourselves in 3 years? I see us continuing to embrace content strategies at the human level because we are unique creatures who crave stories. Just in
Hmm.
general, that's in our DNA. We also will lean in further to the content strategies because they feed these LLMs. It's what programs these agentic tools to thrive. So brands need to double down on their organic strategies, even though it is a marathon, not a sprint. And it's really, really, really challenging and frustrating to build
Hmm.
KPIs around those and report on those regularly. You can do it in
Hmm.
volume and numbers, but unless we're generating those dollars, those cold, hard dollars quickly from those organic strategies, it can be more of a pain than a blessing.
Hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think people are really going to start diving down in the criticality of leadership coaching as well. I think that's a really important cornerstone that is left out of the mix, particularly in
Hmm.
startups, because startups move so quickly. These emerging brands specifically,
Hmm.
they're moving so quick, and their team members are expected to adapt on a dime and shift and do things that's not in their zone of genius. It's not in their working genius. And that is doomed for destruction as well. So if you want to operate on all cylinders and you want to be as productive and organized as possible, but who, not how, and that alignment strategy overall is everything. So having a right coach in your corner is going to get you exactly where you need to be in those 3 years.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think it's again, it comes down to what are the things that as a leader, how do you keep replacing yourself, right? How do you keep delegating things so that you can continue to elevate and be the best version of yourself, and then hire people to do the things that you're currently doing that someone else might be able to to your earlier point, better, and maybe more quickly, and actually enjoy doing it.
Isn't that the name of the game here? Loving our
Mm,
lives, being grateful.
exactly. And so, Chantel, any last words of advice before we wrap?
Stay human. I know it's frustrating, and you can feel like you're competing against robots and you can never win, but if you're not winning, you're learning, right? So I suggest that everybody goes and picks up this book, the 6 types of working genius ASAP if they're not familiar, because that is a big stepping stone forward.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. And I think, and they also, there's a lot, Working Genius has a lot of online resources too. But I think you're right. Having the book handy that you can sort of read, especially now as we're in the middle of summer and people are going to be taking a little bit of time off. Hopefully, a good thing to read if you want to stay connected to being the best leader you can be. Chantel, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much, Brendan.
It was good to see you.